How many fish would it take to possibly divert you from following Jesus? That's our question for today. Already in Luke's Gospel, Jesus has announced his mission as the Spirit-empowered servant of the Lord, as described by the prophet Isaiah. He has come to confront Satan, to overthrow his power and disarm the power of death. This new order of things is like a year of jubilee, a reset, a fresh start, where all debts are forgiven, especially the debt of sin. And this new order of things is ultimately a new kingdom, the kingdom of God. Stuart Holman here with you again for another in our series of daily devotionals on Luke 3 through 5. In Luke 5 we see that Jesus will not carry out his mission alone. He's going to call disciples to follow him, who will assist him in furthering the kingdom. Jesus begins by calling some fishermen to be his disciples. They are finishing up their work for the day. They're packing away the nets, cleaning out the boat. It's been a poor night's work. No fish. And Jesus borrows the boat to be a speaker's platform. Verse 4. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they'd done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signalled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. Now from here, the narrative zooms in on Simon's reaction to these events. Simon Peter becomes a lens through which we might evaluate our own response to Jesus' call. Verse 8, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Now it's possible to read Simon's reaction to Jesus very piously. When he falls in front of Jesus saying, "Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man," we could take Simon Peter's protest at face value. Simon is a sinful man, and here he comes to a fresh, stinging awareness and confession of that fact. He realizes who Jesus is, his majesty, his power, perhaps even his divinity. And in that instant, he sees his own smallness and the dirtiness of his failures and lapses and losses. Shame drives him to his knees. It's a kind of piety that's probably secretly hoping that Jesus won't actually leave him, even though he begins by saying, "Go away from me, Lord." But I wonder if that reading seems a little unrealistic, a little at odds with everything else that the Synoptic Gospels tell us about the development and growth of Simon Peter's faith. And so we begin to wonder, what if we think about this differently? What if Luke invites a more cynical and wary reading of the situation? You see, in chapter 4, Luke records Simon Peter as having witnessed everything that has happened to date, not just in the synagogues, but even in his own lounge room. Even as the demons cry out, "You are the Son of God." What was Simon Peter doing all that time? Was he not paying attention? Why is the fishing boat the moment when he does suddenly recognize the power, the holiness of Jesus? Imagine that moment with me in the boat as the fish are being hauled in. The exhilaration of it, that dizzy, giddy sensation of pay dirt, breakthrough. This is a financial windfall for any small town fisherman. Wait till his wife hears about this. Now we can take that holiday we always dreamed of. Now we can afford that new, bigger fishing boat. What if laughing out loud having landed his fortune, Peter looks at Jesus and sees opportunity. Maybe Peter's just about to recruit Jesus to make him a partner in his fishing business. Perhaps, 10% share of the profits to begin with. But there's a strange look in Jesus' eyes, a wild, burning and dangerous look. And Simon Peter gets a hunch about what's coming, that Jesus' calling is not to follow Peter. His role and his mission is not to advance Peter's career, enhance Peter's reputation and thicken his wallet. What if Simon Peter sees all that in Jesus' eyes? He sees that Jesus is not a man who simply exists to come onto our fishing boats and fill up our nets. In an instant, perhaps Simon Peter knows that Jesus is about to say, "Follow me," which means leave everything. The fish, the boat, the nets, the safety, the security, his identity. Leave everything. Now imagine that moment. Peter falls before Jesus and he begs him to leave. "Depart from me. I'm a sinful man, more interested in fishing for my family's prosperity. Depart from me." It's one of those turning point moments in life, isn't it? In that moment, someone's got to leave. Either Peter leaves everything or Jesus leaves Peter. This kind of thing happens every day somewhere. Jesus comes onto our boat and fills up our nets with a job promotion or a new car, some kind of windfall, and our prayer is, "Oh Lord, depart from me," which means, don't take it away. You leave me alone, Jesus, so that I don't have to leave all this behind. Go away and leave me to enjoy all my fish. And I'll call you up if the fishing gets scarce again. But Jesus is not finished with Simon Peter. He responds to him in the second half of verse 10, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." There's something significant happens in that interaction, perhaps not fully recorded in Luke's Gospel, but the results are clear. Verse 11, "So they pulled their boats up on shore, they left everything and followed him." Not just Simon Peter, but also his brother Andrew and their two business partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee. They leave everything and they follow Jesus. Imagine the shores of the Sea of Galilee littered with boats and nets and fishing gear and a very large number of fish flapping around on the sand. Now, I suppose it's possible that the other members of the Zebedee family, along with Simon and Andrew's families, collect up all of the fish and sell them for a large sum of money, thus providing for them while their main breadwinners are otherwise occupied. It's possibly God's provision for their families, but actually the scriptures are silent at this point. Instead, I think we're meant to focus here on the fishermen leaving everything in order to follow Jesus. Why? Well, now we have another insight into the mission of Jesus. It requires a personal response. People respond to his invitation and they become fishers of people. Today in our town, Jesus is still calling people to follow him, just as he called Simon. Jesus calls people to leave behind their boat, the fish, the nets, their projected future. And instead he calls them to embrace his future. Jesus' mission now includes us. He carries it out through us. Jesus did not come to fill up fishing nets or whatever might be the equivalent for us. Jesus did not come to follow us. He calls us to follow him, and this is personal. Just as he addressed Simon Peter in that boat full of fish on that day, so he also addresses us. I like to imagine that Jesus comes up to each one of us some moment today and he looks us straight in the eyes and he says, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." I wonder what we would do. Jesus begins by saying, don't be afraid. So I'm assuming that that might be a natural and normal initial response. If you abandon your comforts or your secure patterns or your habit of life, what fears arise? We might fear for our financial security, or we might fear for our reputation. We might just fear change, the unknown. But Jesus says, don't be afraid. Why? Because the loss of these things, should that actually happen, which doesn't necessarily follow, but should we lose these things, we gain something much greater. Simon Peter abandoned a life of being a small town fisherman in order to become Jesus' disciple. Just knowing Jesus as his disciple is better than catching fish. But later, this knowing of Jesus meant, of course, that Peter would grow to be the leader of a fledgling movement that would change the world. Jesus says, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. There's nothing to fear, because Jesus' purpose is far greater than anything we might imagine for ourselves. I'm not saying that we're all going to become apostles. I'm not saying that we will change the world in the way that Peter did. What I'm saying is that knowing Jesus is enough. Yes, there is a fear to be addressed. There are practicalities and necessities of feeding the family or whatever. But the cause, the catching of people for the kingdom of God, is worth it. The life of following Jesus is never wasted. How many fish would it possibly take to divert you from following Jesus? Or will nothing get in your way? No amount of fish, because of the surpassing worth of being with Jesus, belonging to his kingdom, and in fact participating in the life of his kingdom. Jesus' mission includes his call to people to leave everything and follow him.